In the beginning there was only silence and the weight of unspoken truths. The ancient keepers of knowledge understood that belief shapes reality more than reality shapes belief. Each scroll contained not just words but the very essence of human conviction. The library stood as testament to civilizations built upon revelations whispered in darkness. Stone corridors echoed with footsteps of those seeking answers to questions never fully formed. Here among the forgotten texts lay the first seeds of what would become law. The scribes knew their work would outlast them, that ink and parchment could reshape the world. Elena traced her fingers across symbols that seemed to pulse with life. The manuscript had been hidden behind false walls for centuries, waiting for someone who could read beyond the surface meaning. Words rearranged themselves as she watched, forming new combinations that spoke directly to her consciousness. This was not ordinary text but living information that responded to genuine seekers. She felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The knowledge contained within could either elevate humanity or destroy the fragile balance that held society together. The city awakened to another day built upon layers of accumulated beliefs. Each stone in every building represented someone's conviction that permanence was possible. Merchants arranged their wares according to traditions established generations ago, never questioning the invisible structures that governed their interactions. Children ran through streets paved with the remnants of old certainties, their laughter echoing off walls constructed by faith in progress. The cathedral bells would soon call the faithful to worship systems older than memory. Elena walked among them carrying knowledge that could shift these foundations. Whispers followed her through the marketplace as people noticed the unusual light emanating from beneath her cloak. The book seemed to respond to the collective consciousness around them, its glow intensifying when doubt or curiosity peaked. Merchants paused in their transactions to stare, sensing something beyond their understanding was passing through their familiar streets. Children pointed and laughed, their innocent recognition more dangerous than adult suspicion. Elena kept her head down, knowing that attention could transform revelation into spectacle. The hidden chamber had witnessed countless meetings where belief transformed into action. Hooded figures sat in silence, their faces obscured but their intentions clear in the way they held themselves. Elena placed the manuscript at the center of the stone table, watching as the symbols carved into the surface began to align with the text. This was why the book had been concealed for so long, waiting for the right convergence of minds and moment. The eldest among them spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of accumulated wisdom. The symbols blazed to life as if awakened by recognition rather than magic. Each carved line pulsed in rhythm with the manuscript's energy, creating patterns that had not existed when the room was last used. The table itself seemed to be responding to the convergence of ancient knowledge and present need. Light traced pathways through the stone that connected to deeper chambers beneath the city. Elena realized she was witnessing the activation of something far older than the building above. The symbols represented not just words but the fundamental forces that shaped civilization itself. The entire chamber filled with resonant energy as the symbols throughout the room synchronized their pulsing light. The hooded figures began to chant in languages that predated recorded history, their voices harmonizing with frequencies that seemed to come from the stone itself. Elena felt the manuscript growing warm in her hands, its pages fluttering without any breeze to disturb them. The knowledge was integrating with the space around them, becoming part of the very walls that had sheltered similar revelations for millennia. Fear and resolve warred across Elena's features as the magnitude of her role became clear. The manuscript had chosen her not for her wisdom but for her willingness to carry responsibility beyond personal comfort. The other figures continued their ancient ritual, but she knew the choice ultimately rested with her alone. Every previous revelation had required someone to bridge the gap between what was known and what could be. She thought of the children playing in the streets above, of the merchants arranging their stalls according to traditions they barely understood. The scroll unfurled itself as if responding to Elena's internal struggle, revealing prophecies written in multiple hands across different eras. Each section described moments when revelation had transformed into the laws that governed civilization. Some passages spoke of advancement and enlightenment, others of collapse and return to chaos. The manuscript was not just knowledge but a living record of humanity's eternal dance between discovery and consequence. Elena saw her own name written in text that could not yet exist, her choice already echoed through time by those who had faced similar crossroads. The cathedral stood empty in the hours before morning service, its vaulted ceilings creating space for thoughts too large for ordinary rooms. Sunlight filtered through stained glass depicting scenes of revelation and transformation, casting rainbow patterns across stone floors worn smooth by countless prayers. This was where belief had been refined into doctrine, where personal conviction became collective worship. Elena walked between the pillars knowing that above ground, people were preparing for another day governed by assumptions they had never questioned. Her fingers traced the edges of the parchment, feeling the weight of centuries embedded in every fiber. The silence of the cathedral pressed against her ears as if the building itself was listening. Each prophecy written on the scroll seemed to pulse with its own quiet life, waiting for her decision. Elena knew that once she committed to this path, there would be no return to the simplicity she once knew. The responsibility was no longer just hers but had become part of her breath, her heartbeat, her very existence. The cathedral seemed to hold its breath as Elena stood surrounded by towering columns and forgotten prayers. She could feel the eyes of history watching from the shadows cast by saints and sinners alike. The scroll in her hands had been touched by countless others who had faced this same moment of decision. Their hopes and fears had been carried through time just as she would carry this burden now. The morning light shifted slowly, marking time she could never reclaim. The words left her lips with more strength than she felt, each syllable bouncing off stone walls that had heard confessions of every kind. As she spoke, the air around her began to shimmer, as though the cathedral was responding to the ancient language. The prophecies came alive in her voice, transforming from mere text into something tangible. Elena felt power flowing through her, not as a gift but as a demand for something greater than herself. Light bloomed from the scroll like captured starlight, illuminating Elena's features with an otherworldly radiance. The cathedral filled with warmth that had nothing to do with morning sun. Ancient symbols on the parchment rearranged themselves as she continued reading, forming new meanings with each passing moment. She realized that the manuscript was not just recording prophecy but actively shaping it. Her voice had become the instrument through which future events would unfold. The light expanded beyond the scroll, reaching every corner of the sacred space with gentle insistence. Stained glass windows blazed with intensified colors, casting rainbow patterns across stone floors worn smooth by generations of faithful feet. Elena's silhouette stood at the heart of this transformation, her voice now joined by whispers that seemed to emerge from the very walls. The cathedral had become more than a building, it had become a living vessel for revelation. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming recognition of what she had become. The light reflected in her gaze like captured flames, showing depths that had been awakened by the ancient words. She could see faces in the brightness, countless others who had stood where she stood now. Their hopes and fears swirled around her like ghosts of decisions made and paths chosen. Elena understood that she was no longer just herself but part of something eternal. The golden radiance slowly retreated back into the parchment, leaving Elena standing in ordinary morning light. The cathedral returned to its usual quiet grandeur, though something fundamental had shifted in the air. She held the scroll against her heart, feeling its importance now as both burden and blessing. The voices that had joined hers fell silent, but their presence lingered like the memory of music. Elena knew that her life had been divided into before and after this moment. Each step echoed with finality as Elena moved toward the cathedral entrance, leaving behind the space where everything had changed. The morning light followed her progress, creating shadows that stretched like fingers across the stone floor. She could feel the weight of expectation settling around her shoulders like a cloak she had not chosen but would wear nonetheless. The scroll in her hands was no longer just parchment and ink but a map of responsibilities she had agreed to carry. Her fingers worked with practiced care, folding the ancient document with reverence for its power and history. The scroll disappeared into the protective darkness of her coat, but its presence remained unmistakable against her chest. Elena's expression had settled into something like peace, though it was peace forged through acceptance rather than comfort. She had crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed, and in doing so had become something new. The morning air outside would taste different now. The cathedral doors closed softly behind her with the sound of finality, leaving Elena standing in the bustling morning street. The contrast between sacred silence and urban noise was immediate and jarring. People passed by without knowing that she carried within her coat the weight of revelations that would reshape their world. Elena pulled her coat tighter around herself and began walking toward a future that would demand everything she had to give. The manuscript had chosen correctly. Elena moved through the crowd with purpose, her coat pulled tight against the morning chill. The weight of the scroll pressed against her chest with each step, a constant reminder of the burden she now carried. The city awakened around her, unaware of the ancient power hidden beneath her coat. Her jaw was set with resolve, though doubt flickered in her eyes. The morning light revealed lines of exhaustion etched into her face from sleepless nights spent deciphering the scroll's contents. Each passing face reminded her that time was running short, that others would kill for what she now possessed. The cathedral bells chimed 9 times as she reached the bridge, their echo bouncing off the ancient stone walls. Elena paused mid-step, her hand instinctively moving to the scroll. The timing was no coincidence. Someone had arranged this meeting, someone who knew exactly when she would emerge from the cathedral. Below the surface, her reflection fragmented into pieces that shifted with each ripple. Elena watched the water flow beneath the bridge, thinking of how easily everything could be washed away. The scroll had already changed her life forever. She wondered if she would survive long enough to understand its true meaning. A man stood motionless on the opposite bank, his gaze fixed directly on her. Elena's fingers tightened around the cold stone railing, recognizing the calculated patience of someone who had been waiting. The morning crowd moved around them both, creating a bubble of stillness that stretched across the water between them. His features were familiar in a way that made her stomach clench with remembered fear. The same cold intelligence that had haunted her dreams for months now studied her from across the canal. He had found her again, just as she had known he would. The question was whether she could stay ahead of him this time. She turned without hesitation, weaving through the morning crowd with practiced ease. The cobblestones beneath her feet felt uneven, each step a calculated risk. Elena knew better than to run. Running would only confirm what he already suspected, that she was afraid. Instead, she walked with purpose toward the one place he would never expect. The shop's interior smelled of old wood and forgotten things, exactly as she remembered from her research. Elena moved past shelves lined with dusty artifacts, her eyes scanning for the specific item she had come to retrieve. The elderly shopkeeper looked up briefly before returning to his newspaper, accustomed to unusual customers with urgent needs. The box was lighter than she had expected, its surface worn smooth by countless fingers over the decades. Elena's fingers traced the carved symbols along its edges, matching them to the scroll's markings. The shopkeeper's eyes remained on his newspaper, but she felt his attention focused entirely on her movements. The morning air hit her face like a slap as she stepped back into the street. Both artifacts now rested against her chest, their combined weight a promise of either salvation or destruction. Elena pulled her coat tighter and disappeared into the crowd, knowing that every second counted now. The game had changed, and she finally held some of the pieces. Elena's footsteps echoed off the damp walls as she navigated the maze of backstreets. The box and scroll felt heavier now, as if responding to her growing unease. She could sense someone following, the presence subtle but unmistakable. Each turn she took was calculated, each pause deliberate. The city around her stirred to life, but she remained hyper-aware of her own isolation. These artifacts held power beyond academic understanding, something the professor had only hinted at in his final letter. She needed to reach the safe house before sunset, before whoever was tracking her found the courage to act. The main thoroughfare offered both protection and peril. Elena melted into the stream of office workers and shoppers, her presence unremarkable among the sea of faces. Yet she could feel eyes scanning the crowd, searching. The box grew warm beneath her coat, its heat seeping through the fabric. She wondered if others could sense it too, if the artifact was broadcasting its presence to those who might misuse it. The scroll shifted slightly in her bag, its ancient paper rustling with each step. She thought of her mentor's warnings about the convergence, about how these objects were meant to remain separated until the proper time. 3 blocks back, the sedan continued its patient pursuit. The passenger adjusted his binoculars, tracking Elena's progress through the morning crowd. His companion at the wheel had been following her for 2 days, ever since she'd first entered the Antiquities district. The man in the back seat had made it clear that retrieval was preferable to elimination, but the methods remained flexible. Elena's research profile had been extensive, her connections within the academic community well documented. The artifacts she carried represented more than historical significance. The cafe's warmth enveloped her like a protective shell. Elena's gaze swept the room methodically, searching for the contact who was supposed to meet her here. The professor had arranged this rendezvous before his disappearance, though he'd never mentioned the urgency that now drove her actions. Steam rose from the espresso machine as the barista worked, the sounds of grinding beans and hissing water creating a comforting backdrop. She chose a corner table, positioning herself to observe the entrance while remaining partially hidden. The box felt cold now, its surface clammy against her ribs. The man's entrance was casual but deliberate. Elena recognized him from the professor's description, though photographs had failed to capture the wariness in his eyes. He moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to expect danger in ordinary places. His leather jacket showed years of wear, its surface scarred by countless encounters. As he approached, Elena noticed his left hand remained near his coat pocket, never quite touching whatever rested beneath the worn fabric. His smile, when it came, was professional rather than friendly. The years of coded meetings and careful exchanges had taught him to read people quickly. The conversation unfolded in careful whispers, each word chosen for its minimal risk of being overheard. Elena outlined the sequence of events that had led her to this moment, from the professor's cryptic warnings to her discovery of the artifact's true nature. The man's initial composure cracked slightly as she described the box's reaction to the scroll's presence. His fingers drummed once against the table, a nervous habit that spoke of past experiences with impossible situations. He'd handled similar cases before, but never with artifacts this old or this powerful. The professor's research had been thorough, but incomplete. The sedan's appearance shattered their careful conversation. Elena watched the man's face drain of color as he recognized the vehicle's significance. His hand moved with practiced efficiency toward the weapon hidden beneath his jacket, but he hesitated at the last moment. The cafe's other patrons remained oblivious, absorbed in their own morning routines. Elena's heart hammered against the artifacts pressed against her chest, their combined energy creating an almost electric sensation. The sedan's doors remained closed, but she could sense the watchers inside, patient and professional. The service alley offered temporary sanctuary from the street's exposure. Elena and her companion moved quickly past dumpsters and delivery entrances, their footsteps muffled by the alley's narrow confines. The man's breathing remained controlled despite the urgency of their retreat, his experience showing in every calculated step. Elena clutched the artifacts tighter, feeling their energy fluctuate with each heartbeat. The sedan's presence outside had confirmed her worst fears. She was no longer just a researcher following academic protocols. She had become a target, and the objects she carried were the reason why. The fire escape's metal rungs vibrated beneath their weight as they ascended toward the apartment's rear entrance. Elena's lungs burned from the exertion, but she refused to slow down. The sedan had been joined by two more vehicles, their coordinated movements suggesting a level of organization that surpassed simple robbery. The man ahead of her moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to vertical escapes, his breathing steady despite the pace. The artifacts seemed to grow heavier with each step, their combined presence creating an almost magnetic pull that made her skin tingle. The apartment's sparse furnishings spoke of temporary occupancy, everything arranged for quick departure if necessary. Elena watched as her companion carefully examined the artifacts, his hands moving with the reverence of someone who understood their true nature. The box's surface showed no visible reaction to his touch, but she could sense its energy shifting, as if testing this new presence. The scroll remained rolled tightly, its ancient paper showing signs of age that somehow enhanced its mystery. The man's expression grew more troubled with each passing moment, his initial confidence replaced by something approaching awe. The map spread across the table revealed a network of tunnels beneath the city, converging at a location marked with a red circle. Elena traced the route with her finger, her companion watching silently. This was it. The final piece. Their only way out. She rolled the map tightly and tucked it inside her coat. Every second counted now. The sound of distant sirens grew louder, seeping through the thin walls. Her companion handed her a small device, its blinking light steady and reassuring. The stairs descended into darkness, each step taking them further from the world above. Elena's companion activated a flashlight, the beam cutting through the damp air. Behind them, the apartment door clicked shut, a silent farewell to the surface. The tunnel stretched ahead, lined with forgotten infrastructure and dripping pipes. They moved in sync, guided by the map's directions and the faint hum of electricity overhead. Behind them, shouts echoed from the stairwell, but they were already gone. The train waited silently on the platform, its cargo doors open like a promise. Elena climbed aboard without hesitation, her companion right behind her. As the engine rumbled to life, she looked back once. The past was slipping away. Ahead lay only the unknown.